everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this free online class that we're having with Richard Photo Lab. I am Haley, the director of If I Made Live. And if you haven't joined us for one of these before, If I Made Live is a weekly online experience where we ask industry experts to teach a class on content that we know that you're interested in. And so recently we've had some amazing film photographers on for these classes, and we've had a lot of questions from you guys about how they're getting the tones that they're getting. Katie, Mary, and Tech Pataja, people we love. And so we thought it would be perfect to bring on Richard Photo Lab for a class to talk about how to get your dream film scans. Yeah, and so today we have Albany, there we go, and Colleen today from Richard Photo Lab joining us to talk about that. Hey guys, thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. We're so excited to be here.
Just
a little background on Richard. We're a film lab. We've been around since the 1970s. We started out in Los Angeles with one guy in a little closet-sized lab space, and we've just been growing on the reputation of quality that he started way back then. And here we are now. So I'm heading up the marketing team here at Richard. I've been here for 3.5 years. You know, I had a background in fine art that led me to the creative side of marketing, which led me to Richard.
Yeah, and I have been here for 4.5 years, maybe. I started in customer service. I'll hopefully know a lot of you who are listening in just from great phone calls we've had, but I'm also a film shooter. I love photography. I'm a photographer. I have a darkroom at home, and so working here has been kind of a dream come true in the sense of just working with so much film. And just last year, I started working more in marketing and kind of helping us do more stuff like this and just get in the film community and get closer to all of you. So we're really excited to be here, and I hope that we can answer all your questions and kind of just clarify some stuff.
So awesome. Well, we love you guys, and we have so many photographer friends who speak so highly of Richard. So that's people to have on board here today. So you guys, the class today is going to be presented in 3 parts. The first part, we're going to dive into your role as the photographer and shooting film and how that impacts, you know, your results, obviously, pretty big impact there. And then part 2 will be building a relationship with your lab, which we've heard from so many experts is crucial in those results. And it's something that we know Richard is really intentional about and invested in, is building that relationship. And then part 3 will be the lab's role in the appearance of your images. So we'll get kind of sciencey and into those technical terms that I think a lot of people shy away from, but could really help you in communicating with your lab. So we'll go ahead and dive into this first part here, which is the photographer's role in shooting film. And I'm going to pull up some slides, you guys, while Albany and Colleen are talking with us. So if there's a brief moment where you don't see me on the screen, just hang tight, and you'll see some beautiful slides in a second here.
Yeah, so when we were kind of doing this, we decided that we wanted to break this up into a couple different parts because we basically broke down, like, what is a dream scan consist of? And we broke it up into kind of what the photographer's role is and what they do, and then kind of the relationship that you have with the lab, and then what the lab has. So it is really 3 strong core things that will produce a really good scan for you and make you very happy and just get you what you want. So the first thing, obviously, being a film photographer that you want to do, I don't know how many of you guys are starting off in film or if you guys are pros, but really one of the most important things is figuring out what film you want to shoot. And I know that can be kind of, I don't know, maybe not something that you think of at first because, oh no, you're just shooting, you know, film is film, but it's actually not. All films are very different. And we just did an amazing test on this. As you can see right here, we put it up on the screen, but we tested basically the 5 most popular, I think that they're the 5 the 5 professional pro films that our photographers use. And we rated them all the same. We shot them in all the same light and we scanned them all the same. And as you can see, the results are crazy different. And so that shows you that film and all the film types are so different that you really need to hone in on 1 or 2 at the very most in order to keep consistent results. So you can't shoot a wedding and shoot Fuji 400H, for example, and then put in some Portra 400 and maybe shoot some XR. You're going to get scans that come back looking really inconsistent. So something on your end that you really want to do is figure out what film type you want to shoot. And film is so awesome because it really empowers you to be in control. So as you can see, all of these films give you different results. So if you're looking for a more neutral style, maybe Fuji 400H is what you want. If you're looking for a warmer tone, any of the Portra family films will give you that warmer tone. Portra is basically a portrait film. It's made to make skin tones look amazing. And so usually with skin tones, you want to warm them up a little bit. So inherently, that film is warmer compared to Fuji. But if you like a neutral tone, Fuji's your film. We've also done some tests where, rating the films at different exposures will give you different results. And so say, for instance, you want a dark and moody look in your images. Maybe you want to underexpose your film, or maybe you want to choose a different film like Portra 800 or Portra 160. If you like vibrant colors, say you love, chrome film, maybe you want Ektar. So it really puts the power in your hands and gives you so much control. And so I want you guys to know how much control you have, number one, and then doing testing, figuring out which film you like and sticking with it. That's so, so, so important. So that I would say is with film on your end, and keeping that control, keeping that consistency. So figuring out what film you want to use and then sticking with it.
Mm-hmm. It's just every film brings, its own qualities to the table. So it's kind of like, you can't expect two different films to look the same, just like if you were a painter, you couldn't expect, an oil painting and a watercolor to look the same. They bring different elements to the table. If you have a chance to go check out that blog on Richard's blog with all the different comparisons of film, we do try to stick to what we consider a pro film. And these are films that just have tighter control in the manufacturing process so that when you're shooting, you're getting consistent results with that film every time. But besides film, there are a lot of other variables that you're going to be working with when you're shooting film. Like Albie said, it can feel overwhelming, but really should be empowering because, again, there's a lot in your hands when it comes to how your images turn out. So besides the film stock, we're talking about things like exposure, how much light is literally hitting your film. We're talking about the lighting conditions that you're actually shooting in. Something that's shot outside in daylight and harsh noon light is different than an open shade, which is different than inside in fluorescent light. That's going to affect how things look. The camera you choose, and not just, different brands and models, but even within the same brand and model, we have to remember, a lot of folks out there are shooting with vintage cameras. And so even the same model, the same make, same year can work a little bit differently because it's in a different condition. Things like that, the lens that you're picking, even the subject matter that you're choosing, obviously, is going to affect how those scans look. When we talk to folks about the kind of look that they're going for and ask if they send some example images, sometimes we notice that the images that they're drawn to, it's not just about like the technical side, it's what that subject matter is. There's something about it that is drawing them to that as well. So, it's kind of bringing the content and creativity side into what your preferences are. So, as long as you can kind of keep your variables consistent to get your negatives consistent, that's how you're going to get consistent scans. Testing is a huge part of this, obviously, right? Because we're all shooting differently. We all have different preferences. So you really want to see for yourself when you're testing these variables. And you want to kick it old school, like in science class, where you're only changing one variable at a time to really understand how that works and how it affects everything else. An obvious note on that, don't test during paying gigs, right? We're going to try to experiment before you get on the job. When it comes to testing, one of the biggest elements that we talk about is exposure, because light is so important in what you're doing with film photography. The light is what's making that image appear on your negative. So really understanding how exposure works is pretty important. So we always suggest that folks shoot test rolls. And the way that you do that is it's testing for exposure. You're going to create a bracket, which is what you guys are seeing on your screen right now. It's where you're basically shooting different increments of exposure to under all the way to over. So then you can look at your negs and see what it looks like, see what that density looks like, see what the resulting scans look like. So when you're changing your exposure, there's two things that affect that, and that's aperture and shutter speed. You can change either one. It's up to you when you're doing your test roll. Just make sure you're only doing one, not both, right? We're testing one variable. And then you're going to see the results. It's probably worth noting that, on those cameras, there's a limited range of shutter speeds and apertures. So you're going to be in situations where you're forced to change one or the other based on what like the standard is. And then you always want to make sure, whether you're shooting a test roll or, you're really out on a real job, bring your light meter, because light meters are so important. Otherwise, you are just guessing at what your exposure is. And so, folks that have been shooting for years and years might get really accurate at guessing because they've had so much experience, but it's always good to use your light meter to know what's going on with the lighting situation.
Yeah, and just something to add to that, I think that when you're beginning, it's so important to look at your negatives. If you go back to that last slide, who knows how many people actually really look at their negatives, but that is what they look like. And that is what exposure looks like and how it affects your image. And so the middle obviously is normal. If we go to the right, it is overexposed, so it's denser, it's richer. If you go to the left, it's thinner, it's underexposed. And so one thing that we're always talking about is kind of looking at your negatives and then looking at your scans and comparing them. And we'll get more into that, but it's just so important to look at your negatives, especially if you're doing bracketed tests. If you're doing a test, that means you're actually into this and you're involved and you're invested. So don't forget the last step of looking at your negatives, because why are you shooting film in the first place if you don't look at your negatives? You really want to. And I think that you're going to find that we're going to say this a lot during this whole thing, but consistency and dream scans are only based on perfect negatives, or negatives that have all the information we need to make your dream scans. So it really relies on you knowing what you're doing. You can only go so far without knowing what you're doing and just kind of guessing and hoping it works out. But the people who were, putting on these pedestals, which you don't need to, but who have really mastered their craft, Jose, Tech, KT, who we have mentioned, they've all really mastered what kind of negative they want to produce, and they produce it all the time. So just wanted to throw that in there.
And, testing this is not just for folks that are new to film photography. Even experienced folks want to do test rolls sometimes, because as you're changing those variables that we talked about, maybe you kind of need to recalibrate what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, maybe your look changes. Maybe your style completely changes and you want something new. So it's always good to, like she said, recalibrate and try and do retest.
So good. So you guys, we did have a question that I think is pretty good and relevant here from, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, but Deji. And they ask, can you talk a little bit about pushing and pulling, or if we're covering that later, tell me that too. But how that affects, where that relationship lies with exposure.
So one thing I'd want to clarify with the person who's asking the question is, do they mean processing, pushing and pulling, or exposure? And so I'll kind of go into both, but I want to make sure that you guys know that there's a big difference between the two. So in exposure, you can overexpose your film. In this example on the screen right now, you see a normal exposure, +1, +2, +3, -1, -2. All of that is referring to exposure. So we added a stop of exposure. We added 2 stops of exposure. We added 3 stops. We took 1 stop of exposure away, and we took 2 stops. So we're reducing the amount of light, or we're adding light to the film. And that is different than pushing or pulling and processing. So pushing and pulling and processing is something that it's really good for you to know. It doesn't happen a lot, but it's a really great tool to have in the toolbox. And basically what it is taking a normal speed film. So, say for instance, Portra 400, and you don't have enough light in your situation, so you're going to rate it at a different ISO than what it truly is. So maybe if you didn't have enough light, you might need to rate it at 800. So you're you're tricking your camera, or you're tricking your meter into thinking that you actually have 800 speed film in your camera. And so it's giving you a reading for 800 speed film. So it's thinking your film is more sensitive to light than it really is. And so thus you're going to get an exposure that is underexposed. And so what we've told people in the past is what you should do is pushing your film. The way to compensate in quotes, the way to compensate for that is to push your film in development because you underexposed it in camera. And so these are situations that don't happen often, but when they do, it's good to know what film can do and what you can do to kind of remedy the situation. So if you underexpose your film, you can push it in processing. Pushing means leaving your film in the developer longer. So it's processing and it's developing those highlights longer to create a wider tonal range between the shadows and the highlights, creating more contrast. Contrast is good especially for underexposed images, but too much can cause color shifts, especially obviously with color film, and it can cause grain and it can cause still muddiness. So you really want to, we really recommend only pushing maybe +2 at the most, push processing, and then really trying to salvage the image in post afterward by adding contrast there, so you have more control over it. Pulling is the complete opposite. So pulling would mean that you, and this is we don't see this one a lot. This is really more for people who are shooting sheet film or shooting, in nature, and they might be using the zone system, or they might feel that their tonal range in their image is really wide, that it's really, it's really big. So there's really bright highlights and really bright shadows in their image. And so they want to compress their negative and make it flatter. So that's what pulling does. It takes out contrast. So you are not processing your film for as long as normal. And so you're not developing those highlights as long. And so you're not getting as much contrast. So it's making you a flatter negative.
Such a good explanation.
But it can get, I can talk more, but it can get a little, daunting with the technical side of things. So.
Yeah, no, that was a great explanation. And I think a thing so much respected in labs is that you guys are artists and scientists and mathematicians in so many ways. So, great explanation. We did have Molly ask, was this slide right now, was it shot with Fuji 400 or Portra 400?
She would know. I'm definitely going to say it's Kodak.
I was going to say, this looks like our Portra 800, actually.
It does.
Nice. All right, Molly. So Portra 800 for that guy. And making sure we don't have any more questions here.
So, well, we can continue with a little bit about just the negatives, how important they are. Essentially, the negative is what we call the truth. It's like everything that all we're doing is scanning the negative. We're not doing magic. We're not adding, a sprinkle of beautifulness to your images. We're scanning your negative. And so you need to provide us with a negative that has everything we need to create a beautiful scan. And so negatives are super important. We always tell people to look at them and then compare them to the scans that they get. Something that we always say is if you see a scan that you love, like this is your ultimate scan, go look at the negative. Go see what it looks like with your eyes, and make sure that all of your negatives moving forward look exactly like that. And how did you get to that? How did you make that? Do you remember what you did? Did you take notes on what exposure? How did you meter? Was that was it bold in, or was it, was it in the shadows? Was it more of an average meter reading on the face? What was it that created that that negative? And so that's super important.
Especially when you're doing a bracketed test, those notes are going to be everything to kind of guide you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And then the other thing you have to remember when you're sending in one of those bracketed tests to the lab is to let us know that you're sending in a test too. Because when we get a job, typically what we're doing is trying to give you as much consistency as possible from frame to frame in a roll, so everything looks like it matches. But when you shoot a test roll, what we want to give you is the best possible scan that you can get with that particular exposure on that neg only. So you always want to give the lab a heads up if you're going to send in a test roll.
Awesome.
And then, so I think just to summarize, in terms of what the photographer needs to do on their end, they need to, one, pick, really essentially what they're doing is reducing the variables. So you're picking a camera, you're sticking with it. You're picking a film type and you're sticking with it. And that doesn't mean that you have to choose one color film. It's going to be different in certain situations you're in, but you really want to try and look at a situation and figure out how to apply your style and your consistent style to it. So, if you're in a tough lighting situation, you'll have to make it work, obviously, but using the variables that you've always used, not changing things up. So that's so, so, so important. All of that stuff. Keeping it consistent.
Love it. So if you guys want to go ahead and dive into maybe even talking through this little slide, some variations of films for people and what benefits people may be looking for in a film, and then which ones to lean towards for that. We have Megan asked, we know that focusing on skin tones for color is a big part of getting it right at the end. But she asked what happens when getting the right skin tones ends up making the rest of the image look off. And I feel like that has a lot to do with the film that you're choosing. So maybe talk a little bit in brief. I know there are so many varieties of film, but what varieties you guys typically see and what you recommend for each of those.
Well, I mean, the shot that you guys are seeing right now is just kind of an example of the wide range that you can get, because there are so many looks that you can get with different film stocks and different choices that you guys are making as the photographers. So do you want to talk about films?
So what Megan's saying, and you're bringing up a great point, which we're going to go into in terms of how scanners work, but how we scan for skin tones, and when we reach a situation where we're scanning for the skin tones, but it's not making the rest of the image look good. Mm-hmm. And that's tough. And it's a tough situation because obviously we're limited by what the scanner does. And the scanner, I'm kind of jumping forward.
I mean, ultimately, it's a balancing
It's a balancing act.
It really is.
I mean, we're always going to try and scan for skin tones, but I think that if we would always try and balance out the situation. We'd never make skin tones too light if it was completely making the background or something else in the image go completely, overexposed or blown out. But you still have to know that we're scanning for skin tones. So that means something in that image, either the light or exposure, something was making the scene in your image behind the person a different value than what the skin tone is. And so that's what we have to deal with. I mean, you can even see this image that Clark Brewer took, the one in the middle on the left-hand side with the shadow going across the girl's face and the highlight. Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one to scan for, but we would know that obviously they would want highlight detail. I mean, we're not going to blow out that highlight and we're going to make it look dark. But that's different than what we usually scan for. We're usually scanning for bright and airy, unless people tell us differently, which Clark is really good at communicating, and we know that he likes a darker style anyway. So it's a balancing act for sure, and very much relies on heavy communication.
So good. So thank you. And I know we're going to dive a little bit more into scanners at the end there. So hold tight, Megan, because you might have a little more meat as well in that answer. So let's go ahead and dive into part 2, just building a relationship with the lab, which is so crucial, I know, in the results. So talk a little bit about how you guys approach that relationship part.
I mean, I think in general, with film photography in this community, relationships are just really important for everybody that's involved, because, I mean, realistically, 15 years ago, digital photography came onto the scene and everybody thought film was dead. And there are people out there that still think film is dead. So for us to kind of come together with this common interest, it really creates a strong community where we can kind of all grow in our craft together. And so building relationships and communicating is a big part of making that community work. you know, what a lab is doing for you is not, it's not an off the rack business. Everything we're doing is custom. Every photographer is different, shoots differently, has different preferences. Every frame that they shoot is different. So every time that we're scanning something, it's kind of custom, which is why the lab really is, we're your creative partners, and we take that relationship really seriously. We understand that this is your livelihood, this is your passion, this is your business, and we're all in for that. We want to be your creative partner. We want to help you get the results that you want, because we know that we play a role in that too. The lab is kind of, you know, it's considered one of those variables that we were talking about earlier, where, you know, not every lab is functioning the same. We're not all using the same equipment. We're not all using the same methodology. I mean, even the folks that are working those scanners, they all have different eyes. So everybody's different, and trying to find someone that you can build a relationship with who fits with your goals is really important. We're invested in you guys because ultimately, you know, your success is our success. When you're making images that you love, and then you're attracting clients that you love, and you've got other photographers who are like, your work's great, I want to do work like that too. It's all great for the film community, which is ultimately great for us too. So, I mean, when we build relationships, we really want to build this rapport of trust to help make communication with you guys easier. Communication is really, really key.
Yeah. And just to build off of that, like she was saying, the lab is a variable for sure. And we always tell people, I mean, it's so good. Like you're testing your film stocks, like you're testing your exposures, test your labs. I mean, send rolls to labs you want to try out, and really find your forever lab. Like, and we don't mean that like in any, you know, a romanticized way. We really mean it in a real way, that you're finding once you find a lab, like a lab when you're a film shooter is 50% of your image, to be honest. I mean, like we're in it with you. And so you want to find a lab that understands you, that you communicate well with, that you have just a great friendship with even as well, who delivers great scans for you. So you want to make sure, and trust, like she was saying, that you find somebody that you have a lot of trust in. And so we always say, you know, test, or before you're ready to really commit, test out the other labs, see what else there is out there. Maybe we're not the lab for you. Maybe another lab is, and that's fine, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's all helping the film community. More people shooting film is good. It's a good day. So we're all about that. But really just, you know, we are, so I think we take it a little above and beyond the whole relationship thing with what we do with the color pack, where we are just so invested in what our photographers are doing in their lives, in their businesses. And so it's really good to find a lab and build a relationship like that, because that is so key to getting the scans that you want, your dream scans, is having a lab relationship that's so strong. Yeah.
And I mean, a huge part of the relationships that we are building are just like being a resource for you when you guys are shooting film. Like we want to help you guys out so that you're getting those images that you want. So it's just a communication line there. Always give us a call if you have questions, whether it's before a shoot or whether it's after you've gotten your negs back and you want to talk about what the results and what you're seeing. Give us a call. We're always here to kind of talk it out. And ultimately, especially when it comes to stuff that you've already shot and you have questions like, I don't understand why my scan looks this way, call the lab, because we've seen your negatives, we've worked on it. So we kind of have a vast understanding of the different elements that have contributed to you getting a scan that looks like that. You know, the internet is a great source for information, but it can also be kind of a dangerous place in the sense that, you know, if you post one scan out to a Facebook forum and ask people like, why does it look like this? What's going on? You could get a myriad of answers that might not be based in fact at all, just because, you know, they haven't seen your negs. So they don't really know what happened when you were shooting to get those results. So always give the lab a call. You know, we want to tell you truthful answers. We want to help you grow as a photographer. We want you to get the scans that you want, and we'll figure it out together. Definitely.
Yeah.
Great advice.
I'm seeing a question.
Yeah.
I turned on the chat.
So I actually skipped that part there. So Katerina, I'm so glad you asked. As we can see in this photo, packaging is a very important part of your relationship with the lab. So if you guys want to dive into that, what do you recommend for packaging and shipping? What makes your job easier?
Good question.
Yeah. So we were going to talk about this, but then we were like, does it have to do with your dream scans? Like, should we say this? But yes, it does. And people want to know. And you would be surprised about all the film that we see come in the craziest packaging that gives us all like slight heart attacks about like, oh my God, I'm so glad this arrived safely. So one, we definitely recommend putting it in a box, something rigid, something that'll protect the film. We've seen a lot of padded envelopes be run over or opened or have holes in them. Mm-hmm. And that's really scary, especially if it's a wedding. I mean, I don't even want to.
Even within that box, like put your rolls of film inside a bag. So if something happens, nothing's going to escape.
I mean, you really can't overpackage it. I mean, give us a good fight. Like give us something that takes us time to open. Like we dare you. Because I mean, we want your film to be safe, and we don't want to open up, and somebody has sent us film in just an envelope, like a letter envelope, and like licked sealed. And we're like, ah! So, I mean, just give us something that it takes us some time and some effort to open, and I think you'll be safe. Mm-hmm. We've always told people that it's really good to expedite their film shipment to us. Mm-hmm. Some people have had great luck with USPS, just ground. But if you can expedite your package, 2-day or overnight, that's really going to guarantee that it's just handled a lot better.
More carefully.
And I think it's worth it, especially if you're shooting a wedding and just something that can't really be shot again, to just take that extra step and send it priority.
And then don't forget your packing slip, guys. So we know where that film came from. We have an online site where you can just fill in what you're sending in to us and then print out a packing slip to include with your film. And that's going to have all your information on it. So we can get those negs back to you, and we can get those scans in your inbox, which is important stuff. Don't just write your name and your email on a piece of paper and throw it in there, because then we might have some trouble translating handwriting and all that stuff.
Somebody spoke about XRay. XRay, yeah. And I think that, so I've been here almost 5 years, and I have never seen an XRay damage film that happened because of shipment. Like, I've never seen that before. And I'm sure we've gotten mixed answers about when things are X-rayed during shipment and if they are. But let's just assume they are, and let's just leave it at that, because in this day and age, a lot of things are probably getting X-rayed, especially probably coming from overseas. And so I would say don't worry about that. We've never seen, like I said, any sort of damage come from solely shipping X-ray purpose or damage. We have seen X-ray damage when people have taken their film and put it on checked baggage. That is like the worst X-ray. It's the strongest, so don't do that. But in terms of shipping your film, we've never seen any issues. It might happen. It might not.
It's rare. And, if you're concerned when you're mailing it, right on the outside of your box, film inside. We've also got folks who will put notes inside of their actual package of film. So if it ever gets lost or anything happens, there's an address that somebody can send that film to, and a little note that's like, hey, these are really important memories. Please, if something happens, send them back to me.
Yeah, because there's humans out there in the world who will read this and hopefully have compassion if they find your film somewhere, which actually has happened before. We've gotten film arrive a year late because it was lost in shipment, but somebody found it and sent it our way. So that's amazing. But honestly, I don't want to scare you guys, because I would say 90% of our business,
probably higher than that. Yeah.
99% of our business is mail-in from all over the world, and we never see issues. So
that's awesome. So you guys are firing off. Yeah, if you want to go ahead, we'll answer all these questions here you guys have about shipment. So any special instructions that we need to tell USPS when we drop it off?
I don't think so. I think, again, if you do want to put a little label on the outside that just says like film inside, so they know, that's always good.
Who knows if it will really be looked at, but it's still good to put there.
Yeah. And then Jared asked, could he send it in a small Pelican case?
Well, do you mean a Pelican case in a box, or Pelican case. I don't know. I think you have to put it in a box, right? We've had that before, though. People have definitely sent in their film in something that we have to send back to them, like an X-ray bag. They put it in that, or they've put it in a Pelican case that we have to send back to them. So just make sure you know that you're going to have to pay for that shipping back to you, but we'll handle anything.
Nice. And then this is a question we've had a lot in previous webinars too, from Jenny. How should they number their film and label them per shoot? Like, what is y'all in that?
So this is really important. Well, I mean, some people do it, some people don't, but we really think it's important because, one, it really makes your life easier. So one, how many of you get pack scans that are completely out of order because you just shot and threw rolls in a bag, and then you get them back and you have like your first roll is the ceremony, then the second roll is the reception, and then the 20th roll is back to the ceremony. It's just all out of order. And it would make your life easier to receive your scans in order, wouldn't it? And then the other thing is, can you imagine somebody trying to scan film that's out of order and trying to make it consistent? So, you know, scanning one roll, that's the ceremony, and then the next roll from the ceremony is not till like 5 rolls later, and they have to remember what they just did. That's really hard. I mean, we're human. So these are not like machines scanning your film that can automatically remember what happened 5 rolls ago. So keeping your rolls in order and sending them to us also helps so much with consistency, so much.
That all you have to do is get a little piece of masking tape and just write chronological order how you shot it. No big deal.
I've shot weddings before with our girl Lisa here, and what she does is she has those little like circular stickers. I don't know what they're called, but she pre-numbers them before the wedding. Like we do it like 1 through 15 or whatever where we think we're going to shoot. It's just in the film bag, and whenever we finish one, we put the number on it, put it in the bag. Finish a roll, put the next number on. So it really takes any hassle of writing anything during the wedding out completely. It's all pre-numbered. You just have to stick the sticker on, and then you're done.
And then another time that you're going to want to use labels is if you're sending in rolls and you want some of them pushed or pulled in processing, but not others. We do need to have that heads up with a label that it's this roll that I want pushed, because, you know, we only have one chance at developing your film. So we got to get it right the first time.
Megan, we do charge extra. It's 50 cents extra per roll to do this. It does
the roll coding.
The roll coding. Sorry. I was reading that. I'm like, we do charge extra for this. It's 50 cents extra to process and scan them in order, just because it takes us a long time to put them in order, and it slows down our workflow when we're doing that. So we have to compensate with the labor that takes. But, you know, if you want to try it out and send us some rolls, we'll do it for free the first time around, just to see if it really benefits your workflow.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So let's go ahead. I'm going to click over to Jane again. And
okay. So I think
we can dive into a pretty juicy section here that we get a ton of questions in. And that is the lab's role in the appearance of your images. So talk about scanning and get into these details here.
So this is really, I'm sure what you guys are going to have the most questions about. This is what we spend a lot of time on the phone with people about, which is scan preferences and what is capable in scanning. What happens in exposure? What happens in scanning? How do I get my final image that I want? So first we'll go into kind of what happens in scanning. So scanning is an overall correction. So that's number one thing that you guys need to remember and consider, is that when we're scanning film, every correction that we're doing, and by the way, all corrections that we do are done in scanning. Promise. they are. And that's just because like our techs they're really skilled at it. They've been doing it for a long time. They really understand color. So they're able to make these corrections in scanning. And so in the scanner, all corrections are made to the overall image. It's not like Lightroom, or it's not like Photoshop, where we can go in and just adjust the greens or just adjust the pinks or just adjust the background. You can't do any of that. It's all it's all corrections made to the overall image. So it's really important to get it right in camera, to, like we said before, give us a negative that has all the information we need to make a great scan. And so that's number one, is to just know that all corrections that are made are done to the overall image. The other thing is that and it might be hard to like wrap your head around this unless you went to school and printed color in the darkroom, but basically all edits or all corrections that we can make in scanning are done basically using opposite colors. So say for instance we want to add magenta or add warmth to an image. So magenta is the opposite of green, like you can see on the scale on the left hand side of the screen. So in order to add magenta, we need to take out green. And so I know that's kind of crazy to think about, but we can't just add magenta and leave the green be. We have to take out green to add magenta.
When it comes to RGB color, which is light, all of these colors are interdependent, you know,
right?
They play with each other to get your final result.
That's the physics. It's the physics of color and light. And so if you are in a green field, think about all the balancing act that we have to do to make those skin tones not green. We have to add magenta, but we don't want to take too much green out because we want the foliage to still look green. And so you have to remember that all of it is a balancing act, even, you know, blue or cyan and red and blue and yellow. They're all opposites. And basically we're always balancing the three or the six.
For example, this graphic that you're seeing on the right, which if you're shooting one-edes, you'll probably come across a situation like this a lot, where maybe you've got a bride and she went and got a fake tan and she's looking a little orange, and maybe you've got a groom and he's kind of nervous, so he's been taking some shots with his groomsmen before the ceremony. What we're trying to do is now we have to make that bride less orange, but we also have to make the groom less pink looking, so we have to find the best version of both. And that's where part of that balancing that we were talking about earlier kind of comes into play, where we're trying to find the best options for everything.
Right. And so like I said, the overall correction that we're doing is really good for you guys to know. And then how we're able to edit color by using the opposites method, or the only way to do it by using that. And then the other thing we want you guys to know is that the only things that we really have control over in scanning are density changes. So that means lightness to darkness, or color. So color balance, like what we're talking about right now. So like this is perfect. So this would be an example of a density change. So do you prefer your images darker? So that means so we're scanning to keep detail in your highlights. So that means we're going to scan it darker to make sure that your highlights retain detail. Or do you like stuff brighter? So we're going to scan for shadow detail. So we're going to bring it up so that we have detail in your shadows. And that obviously will bring your highlights up as well and potentially get them close to blowing out. But what do you prefer? And this is totally up to you, and it's your vision. You just got to let us know what you prefer. But that is an example of a density correction, or what is achievable in scanning. And what we do on a regular basis is kind of going between these two. I would say by default, we're always going to try and scan for shadow, because not a lot of that's essentially scanning for skin tone, where we are trying to maybe brighten skin tones or make them look as best as possible. But if you like the darker, moody stuff, totally awesome with us. Just let us know and we can do it that way.
So we should probably talk about the things too that we can't really control very well in the scanners. There's two of those as well. It's saturation and contrast. So saturation, we have control in the sense that there are controls in the scanner to do that, but there's a reason that we don't do it, and we leave it to you guys in the shooting process, which is that if we start changing saturation, you're going to get weird colors where all of a sudden your highlights are going to look pink or blue if we oversaturate. And then you can also lose some of like the smoothness in your gradients and your shifting values, where all of a sudden things get kind of like blocky and chunky, which is why we really don't want to mess with saturation in the scanning process. That is best left for you guys when you're choosing your exposure settings.
So if you go to our blog, I would say you should definitely check it out after this or during it. But we just did that film test, and you can see all the different films shot at different exposures. And it's subtle. Film is subtle. You have to remember it's not like digital where saturation comes in and bang neon colors. But it's subtle, which is amazing and nice, and it doesn't overexpose your or blow out your highlights. It just naturally makes them a little lighter. But overexposure will essentially gives you more light on the film, so it develops more dyes in your film, and that's going to essentially give you more saturation, luminance, whatever you want to call it. But I would say if you check out our film test, you'll see that the more overexposure you have, the more subtle saturation you get, because of just the technical side of shooting film, which is you're giving your film more light, which is developing more silver halides on your film, which is developing more dye, which is more color. So just remember that. Contrast we can do in scanning, but we choose not to because it really is a subjective and very powerful thing that I think that is best for you guys to control, and even better in post for you guys to control. In exposure, you can control contrast by just deciding on the light you're shooting in. Obviously, light has a big impact on the contrast in your setting, in your scene. So if you're shooting on a rainy day, it's probably very overcast. There's probably no shadows, direct shadows in your image, and so you're not going to have a lot of contrast. If you're shooting on a really bright day, high noon, you'll have really sharp shadows and you'll have a lot of contrast. And so it's really important for you guys to obviously, look at a scene and take it in. Like, what's happening in this scene right now that I need to consider? Am I going to need to add a little bit of contrast because the scene is really flat? Or is it going to be really contrasty and I'm going to need to pull it back? You need to be able to analyze the scenes before you shoot them.
We kind of like to use the analogy of like when you're cooking, where some seasoning you add when you're in the kitchen making it, and some seasoning you add at the table when you're about to eat it. And contrast is one of those things where it really is best for the photographer to decide in shooting or in post how they want their contrast to look, because for us, contrast is just not a precise control. It's not something that we can consistently control with your shots. I mean, part of that is just that the value, the brightness and the darkness of your highlights versus your shadows change at different rates. Like, highlights get darker at a different rate than shadows get darker. So these are all things that kind of affect our controls over contrast, which is why we want you guys to take care of it so that we're not making things inconsistent by trying to change all of your contrast settings. Not a good idea.
Some people they'll get scans back and they'll be like, they're so great, but I wish can you guys just add a little bit more black to them? Or they're almost talking to us in like Lightroom terms. And we all know what that means. They want the black slider to go down more so it has a little bit more pop. And we're like, we don't work in Lightroom. I mean, we really don't. We work in scanning. We work with what you're giving us and your negative. And we're giving you the truest scan possible. We're giving you something to kind of work from. I mean, no, well, that's not really it, but we just want you to be able to add that seasoning, because it really is to your preference. We wouldn't want to do that for you and then you have to pull back from that.
Ultimately, part of like the trust with your relationship is that we trust you, the photographer, to send us negs that are exposed for the look that you want. That's just something that we have to trust. So
back to the consistency with that one. We did have Erica ask if we could talk about some examples of what the photographer asked for when their film got scanned. And Erica, I think at the end, if we have time, I just wanted to let you know we might skip through here, but we'll do that at the end if we do have time.
Sure.
So let's dive into scanners. In the great debate.
One of the biggest debates, yes, definitely. The debate of Naritsu versus Frontier, I think, is something we still constantly hear all the time, and it totally makes sense to, ask, because there's a lot of mystery around that. But, even though this is a variable that you need to consider when you are getting your film scanned, maybe doesn't affect things quite as much as people think. So we like to tell photogs that the difference between the Noritsu and the Frontier is kind of like Coke versus Pepsi, right? It's the same thing pretty much. It's a little different, and we can pick up on those differences, and we all have a preference for one or the other, but they're pretty similar. And the differences that you do see between the scanners are caused by the way that they interpret magentas. They interpret them a little bit differently. And then, from different lighting scenarios, those are going to be interpreted differently, those magentas. So we can't definitively say anything like, oh, one scanner is like greener or warmer or anything than the other one, because, again, we're considering those lighting conditions for each individual shot, but the difference does come from the way that magentas are interpreted. So it's just a matter of preference. The only time where it's not a matter of preference is when it comes to black and white film, which we will always scan on the Noritsu. The reason being, when you scan black and white film on the Frontier, what can happen is it can get a little muddy, so it doesn't really look like a true grayscale black and white. It can also get a little bit flat. So we only do that one on the Noritsu because we know we can get better contrast. We know that we can get a true look of black and white on that particular scanner. Noritsu also has a few other benefits as well. It's better if you need to do big prints and you need to artificially res things up. The structure of that scan is better for that. Noritsu can also just be a great starter scanner if you're just starting with film, because it is a newer machine. It's newer technology, so it has some tighter controls as far as what we're doing on the scanning side. So maybe if you're still experimenting with negs and they're not as perfect as you want them to be, the lab can get you some better results with those particular kinds of negs if we're working with the Noritsu. Let's see. We can also do comparison tests for you.
Yes.
If you send in a roll, just give the lab a call, and what we'll do is we'll scan a few frames on both of them so you can kind of see what the differences are in the context of your photography and your work.
Yeah, so we put together these kind of image boards of some Frontier images that of clients we work with who are strictly Frontier people. And then we have one that's Noritsu as well. And it's really, we've talked with so many people who will say something that they think the Frontier looks like, and then the other person says the opposite. And so it's so subjective and so personal. So we really implore you guys to test on your own, and send us a negative that we can scan on the Frontier and the Noritsu for you to see the difference, not for us to tell you what the difference is, because like I said, so many people have said different things about it. One says the Noritsu is cooler, one says the Noritsu is warmer. What is it to you? That's really all that matters. So do a test for yourself. But yeah, you can see Noritsu. I would say, if I was going to I don't want to make blanket statements, but I would say just in general, the Noritsu does tend to be a little warmer, and the Frontier will tend to be a little bit kind of richer in the blacks, maybe a little bit more, I would say, like poppier. It just has a little bit of pop to it, and the Noritsu, because we can do so much with it, it tends to be just more, the tonal range is more even on the Noritsu, and we can do more with it. So it's not as punchy.
Awesome. And David asks, are there certain film stocks that work better with one scanner versus the other?
Good question. The only real thing that we talk about with that is there's two particular films that can sometimes have trouble on the Frontier. Just, it's an older machine, and sometimes if it picks up something that's not quite normal on the film, it acts a little weird, and those are Kodak Portra 160 and Ektar 100. And it doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes it's fine, but sometimes we do see a slight issue with a little bit of silver left over. It doesn't happen at all labs, to be fair, too. If someone is functioning with a mini lab that does small amounts of film, they might not see the issue as much. But ultimately, we always suggest those films go on the Noritsu just so you can avoid some weird interpretations that come from the Frontier with those particular negatives. We're not always sure why it happens. Again, it's just the Frontier is an older machine. It's 20-year-old technology.
Great answer. And then what about expired film? Is there any?
I mean, expired film, expired film's awesome. You
So
just
much
never
fun.
know what you're going to get. So just know that for sure. But
expired film is not the film that you shoot on a paying gig. Expired film is like, I'm going to have a little fun, get creative, because it's just not dependable in the results. What it was promised before it was expired might not be how it's acting now that it's expired.
And honestly, too, I mean, it really depends on how it was kept and stored. If it's expired, if it expired in 2012, but it's been kept cold, chances are it'll be fine. But you want to do tests. But I'm assuming you're talking about like super, super expired film and, maybe 90s, early 2000s, even older. We've seen that and we've processed it and it's fine. And I don't think that there's a scanner that works better for one or the other, but we always say to Noritsu, we have more control. It's better for negatives that maybe are under or overexposed, and it just deals with them better. So we're always pushing that, just because it really is technically a better scan. You get a file that you can print much larger, and so we're always going for that.
Awesome. And then from Corinna, is it true that Frontier can handle very overexposed negatives in a better way?
I would have to. I mean, I have seen that before so there's something called the staircase effect, and it happens with very overexposed negatives, extremely overexposed. We're not talking like 2 stops. We're talking like 6+ stops where your sky is like the negative is bulletproof. You can't even see through it. And scanners have an extremely hard time, even Frontier scanners, scanning overexposed negatives. And so we're really trying to steer people towards, becoming educated in exposure and finding your exposure, but not relying on overexposure as like a safety net. Like, I'm just going to overexpose and I know it'll work out, because that's really not the case. There are a lot of situations where overexposure actually hurts your image or, is not good for the scan or the scanner. It takes a lot longer for us to scan. I have heard that. I can't speak on it though, because I don't know like the science behind it. I'd have to ask our production manager if Frontier handles overexposure better, but I have seen that a little bit where it doesn't produce the staircase effect as much.
Awesome. So you guys, we have some more questions rolling in, which we knew would happen with the scanners. We're going to keep those for Q&A, but move into a really crucial part that may answer some of these questions, may not, and we'll nail them down if they don't, but which is communicating to your lab about your scans. It is one of the most crucial parts of this process. So I'll let you guys take it here.
Absolutely. I mean, communication is everything when it comes to refining your scans and really dialing in what you want. Specificity when it comes to that, super important, because we're dealing with a lot of subjective terms, right? So what warm means to Albany isn't necessarily what warm means to me. Maybe she thinks warm means it's more yellow, and I think warm means more magenta. So when you're communicating your preferences, you really want to focus in, like, how detailed can I get with this description so that the lab knows exactly what I'm talking about. So when it comes to your color preferences for the color balance of things, of course, remember that we're scanning for skin tones to a degree. Just background, the reason that we're doing that is if there's a person in your photo, chances are they're the subject of your photo. So we want them to look really good. So our focus is always going to be to make the skin tones look good, and then other things kind of fall where they may. Again, we're not going to let them fall to the point where it's like skin is perfect, but then everything else looks awful. We're still trying to find a balance. But when you're making those preferences, definitely keep skin tone in mind. And then when you're talking about warmer, again, specifying what kind of warmer, or cooler. Does cooler mean more blue? Does cooler mean more green? All that kind of stuff is important. And then the other side is specifying your density preferences. Again, thinking about that in the context of skin tones. How light, how dark do you want them to be? So part of making that request is obviously telling us maybe you want things a little bit brighter, maybe you want them a whole lot brighter, maybe you want them a little darker, and then back to on the slide we had seen before about scanning for shadow detail versus highlight detail is also important if you have a preference. And, you know, depending on what you're shooting, I mean, we know some folks who, when they shoot black and white, they'd rather shoot for highlights in the, details in the highlights, because that was the kind of framing and look that they were going for. And then maybe in color, they want to shoot for shadow details. So let us know where you want your details to lie. Or maybe you just want everything super neutral, as even as possible. Again, especially if you're sending in tests and stuff, let us know that too. It's really about, though, really getting specific with the things that you want and letting us know every time that you order what those specifics are. And then if you want to take it a little bit further, we also have pre-created color profiles that we've created with some of our clients.
And don't think that that's a preset. All that is, so what we do is we have profiles for clients. You know,
KT, Tech, Jose, they all have them.
And it's really just, I mean, they all have their own custom profiles with us, and that meant that they created an image board, or they gave us images that we use as reference when we scan their images. That's what it is. It's not a preset or anything like that. So say, for instance, you love, you know, text work, you can send in your scans and ask for his profile to be used when scanned. And that would be that the scanner operator would scan your film and reference his image board, or his color image board when scanning your film. So let's take Jose, for example. Jose has a much warmer, lighter look. It's not too light, but it is lighter and warmer. So if you send in your film asking for a Jose, we would scan it in a warmer, lighter way. And so that's really, I want to make sure that you guys know that that's what it is. It's not presets, it's not anything we do in Lightroom or after. It's using an image board and referencing it when scanning.
And we've also, when we build the color profile, you know, that's a long conversation. It comes with homework for the photographer, for us to kind of look at different examples and different shots. It's a more dialed in version of those scan preferences that you would be telling us about. And it's important to note too that just because you use someone's color profile doesn't necessarily mean that your images are going to look exactly like theirs. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Their variables are going to be different than yours. Maybe they're shooting on a different film stock. Maybe they're shooting in different lighting situations, you know, all that kind of, all those things come into play. And also when we're looking at some of those superstars that you want to model your work after, you have to remember that the work that they're showing you online and their website and stuff, I mean, they're not showing you every frame. Even the very best of the best, most experienced film photographers still get bad frames, still get bad scans. That happens.
Yeah.
So not every frame is going to look perfect.
So Rowena, you asked that question earlier about whether or not you could request a profile, and you can. So but keeping that in mind, still your consistency on your end is going to be the best possible way to get the results that you want, and less of a preset, more of a reference.
Yeah, and I would just say that, like, in all of this, we're, like she was saying with the color can be so subjective, and so asking for a profile essentially, or even creating your own, all eliminates that subjectivity, because, okay, that person wants Jose's work. They like the warmth that Jose gets. Okay, we're going in that direction. It's not a blanket statement of, oh, can you make these warm? What does warm mean? What is that? Does it mean red? Does it mean magenta? Does it mean yellow? What does it mean? And so if you're asking for a profile, or if you're giving us more specific direction, or if you're creating your own profile, that all eliminates subjectivity and promotes consistency in your work and in the scans. Are there any more questions? I see questions. Did it freeze?
Uh-oh.
Oh, no, we're good. She moved. So I guess we can go to these questions later. I'll talk a little bit about the color pack process. So we touched on profiles, which all of you can send in your film and use a profile. And again, that's so that we're on the same page as you. You're giving us direction, and we totally understand it. We're going, okay, they want tech. Let's scan like we scan tech. Got it. We're on the same page. Taking that next level, we can create your own color profile, which is amazing. It's called the color pack process. And basically a color profile, you would be sourcing images for us that would all be your ideal skin tones. And it's a process. It's about a 1.5-month long process, but it's really rewarding in so many ways. It builds that relationship. It solidifies it. We really understand what your skin tones need to look like, what your detail shots should look like, what your group shots should look like, so that we can deliver that every time.
So part of that profile building process, like we always want you to try out pre-existing profiles before you even just start to develop your own, just to see how they work. And then what you're going to do is you're going to send us, like Albany said, examples of stuff you love, stuff you don't love. You're going to fill out a questionnaire telling us a little bit about your style and about you and your experience as a film photographer. And then you'll sit down with our production manager, Bill, and have a conversation where you'll both be looking at prints. So you're not looking at the differences from screen to screen. You're looking at the exact same colors, and have a good conversation with him, not only about how you want your scans to look and what the lab can do to make that happen, but also we'll talk about your shooting techniques and be like, well, if you want to see this, here's what you can do on your end too, and really nail down how to make that happen. And then the other half of the color pack process is actually a business consultation with the lab owner, Brian. He's insanely smart when it comes to business, and he's been in the photo industry for so long and seen so many successes and failures, has a really good handle on the business side of things. And you'll just have an hour to kind of talk about whatever your pain points are in your business and, what we can do to fix them, different goals to set, actions to take, all of that good stuff to really not only take your images to the next level, but take your business and your branding to the next level.
Can I answer?
Yeah, you can.
I think that's how you say it. Sorry. Really good question. So I would say most people for color film tend to overexpose their film. That tends to be normal, where they might shoot their film. It's a 400 speed film. They might rate it at 200 just because that's going to give them a denser negative. People tend to meter for the shadows. That in itself is overexposing your film. You have to know that metering for the shadows means that you want the shadows to have detail. So we're giving the shadows detail, that which is bringing everything else on the curve of your image. It makes it higher. It goes up because you're pushing your shadows up, so everything else is going up. With film, it's awesome because film retains highlight detail so well. I mean, if you were gonna shoot for shadows on digital, you would have like a bright white everything because it wouldn't be able to handle that. And film really handles it. I mean, like I was saying before, film is so subtle. Like, it's so beautifully subtle in all of the changes it makes and all the steps that it takes. So like underexposure, overexposure, it makes these subtle adjustments that are really, really nice. It's a really nice gradient. So I would say if you're metering for the shadows, you really don't need to tell us to scan for the shadows, because your negative, it's built into your negative. It's already going to give us that. You would only need to tell us if you want us to scan for highlight detail and bring it down, because that would be us going in and doing something different than what your negative is shot for. So you would not need to tell us that. You would just then, because your density preference is already kind of determined in how you shot your negative. You just need to tell us what your color preference is. Do you want it warmer? Do you want it cooler? Do you want to use a profile? Do you want to create your own custom profile? What do you want with your color?
So good. So you guys, we have about 15 minutes left here with Albany and Colleen. And I just wanted to go ahead and go into some Q&A that trickled in throughout the class here with Kelly, who asked a great question earlier. What do you typically see as the most common habit and mistake photographers make in shooting that keeps them from having great scans? Like, what's the biggest mistake you guys come across? The most frequent?
Well, there's a lot.
Right? I would say, let's see, the biggest mistake in shooting is, again, not using your light meter. And we're not talking about the one that comes inside your camera, because those aren't always reliable. Get yourself a good light meter. Because again, that's feeding you factual information that you can then make your artistic choices based on. It's super important to meter. And I would say outside of shooting, again, a very dangerous thing to do is to kind of try to seek answers and information from people that might not know the answers and might be feeding you misinformation. Misinformation is a passion killer in this industry. We know that there's a lot of mysteries about how film works and a lot of science and complicated stuff that's going into that. So if you're taking advice that happens to be incorrect about what you should be doing or changing in your shooting to get results and it's not working, like, that's really discouraging. That makes people not want to shoot film anymore. And that's definitely not something we want, because it can be a great thing, but you do have to be working off of information that is correct.
And I would also say that assuming that the lab can read your mind, so not communicating, that is a big thing that's going to not. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but we're not going to be able to deliver you what you want if you don't tell us what you want. And thinking that we can read your mind or, give you what you want without any clear direction is, you have to give us that.
And please don't be afraid to tell us like when you're not happy, because that could really stink too, because like we said, a lab relationship is a commitment and you want to be invested and make that work. But like, if you guys can't tell us when you're not happy, then we can't fix the stuff on our end that's making you not happy. So please don't be afraid to call us and tell us.
Guys, it's a romantic relationship. You really have to see it as that. Like, you're dating us, we're dating you. We don't want this relationship to end. There's love there. And so we want to make it right. Or, if we're having an issue and we need to tell you about that, communication. Like, that's what life is about. Communication will be good. And so that's really how you need to look at this, is tell us what's wrong. We'll fix it. We want to make this right. Or, we'll tell you something that's going on with maybe your film that you can adjust. We're in it together. We're teammates. We're in a relationship.
I love it. We have a couple of people asking about how to meter for landscape photos, and then similarly, a lot of people asking about light meter recommendations.
Okay.
Follow this one.
Metering for landscapes is tough because of, I don't know what method you want to use or what you're currently using. Do you use an incident meter or are you using a spot meter? But if your images are looking underexposed, that means that you obviously are needing more light on your neg. So I would maybe start with any situation, you want to go in and analyze your light. Is it a really bright day and you're looking at this, beautiful landscape vista and there's really bright clouds and there's really dark trees and a shadow? That's a really wide tonal range that you're going to have to deal with. So what is your priority? Do you want detail in those trees? Okay, so we're gonna probably meter for those trees, and then you're gonna have to either adjust in scanning, bringing back the clouds if they do overexpose, or maybe pull process. It's just tough because I'm coming from a very fine art background, and I do a lot of landscape pictures on 4x5 or on where I'm just solely going out and I'm really able to pull or push process my film to analyze the situation using a spot meter. So that's how I do it. I usually meter for the shadows, or I try and bring up my shadows and then deal with my highlights later, either in processing or in, bringing them back. But it's film. They usually tend to be there. But you could also do an incident meter reading where if you're in a rush and you need to, take a meter reading, I would do something where maybe you're metering for like the same with metering for a couple who is standing there. You could do just an average meter reading where it's literally just right in front of your face and it's getting just an average meter reading of the light that's hitting your subject. But landscapes are tough because there's so many different tonal values there that you're trying to compensate for and trying to get detail in. So it really depends on how many, or like how you're metering. Are you doing spot metering or are you doing incident meter reading? And then why hasn't it worked for you? How are you using those metering methods?
And then suggestions for light meters?
Oh, So Sekonic is great. Sekonic is awesome, especially if you get the light meter that has the incident meter and the spot meter. Then you're golden because you can do both in any situation. You could use the spot meter when you're in landscapes, and you can use the incident meter reading when you have a couple and you're just taking it right in front of them. So I would say this is Sekonic. I think it's like the 7 series. There's a lot of great models, but anything Sekonic. But honestly, I mean, I have a Minolta light meter that I got with my Minolta 35 millimeter camera on eBay, like when I was 19. And it is great. I mean, it's an incident meter reading. It does the trick. I've tested it with my Sekonic next to it, and it's just an incident meter. It's simple. So it's really, honestly, if you guys have a light meter, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what brand. But if you wanted the best, I'd go Sekonic.
Yeah, and then a real quick 101 on the difference between spot and incident meters.
So incident meter is the bulb. So if you, that's probably maybe what you guys are more used to seeing is the meter that has a bulb, a white bulb on it. And it's literally taking a meter of all the light that's hitting the bulb. So, you know, you put that in front of my face, and then it would take a meter reading of all the light that's hitting me right now in like a 180 degree span.
And incident meters are really great because they're not as affected by things like reflectance and color and stuff that are in your scenes. Again, it's really just measuring that light that's hitting.
Right. And then a spot meter is really good for if you want a specific tone. So if I'm going in and it's literally a scope in your, it's like a zoomed in scope on your incident meter where I'm looking through and I'm pinpointing almost like in your camera. It's essentially very similar to your in-camera meter, but you're spot metering a part of your image. So you could go directly into the shadow of a tree with your spot meter and tell me what it will take to get that shadow, you know, brighter, or to zone 5. What will it take to get there? And so I would just meter that shadow, or I can just meter a highlight. So it's very specific metering, and then incident metering is more general metering.
Awesome. Another great debate. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say they're both very accurate because you're in control of where you're putting the meter at all times. It's not like a in-camera meter where I'm taking a picture of Colleen, but my meter might be reading her hair, or it might be reading this highlight right here, and I don't want that. I want the meter to be reading right here exactly. And so you have control, and that's what you want in everything.
And that is another reason, by the way, that you want to test for yourself. You don't just want to use the settings that somebody else told you, because even the way that you hold your camera and your light meter is going to affect your exposure settings. You always want to test for yourself.
So good. Bulb in or out? You guys have a...
Totally up to you. Whatever you do, just do it and keep it consistent. So I always go bulb out, but that's just because I've always gone bulb out, and I didn't even realize bulb in was a thing until I worked here. So, I mean, it makes sense to me to be bulb out because I want to take an accurate meter reading of the light that's hitting the bulb, and if it's out, then that'll be more accurate. But if it's in, obviously, and you have it tilted, it's going to be overexposing your film a little bit more because it's not seeing as much light. Totally up to you how you do it. We just always say, however you meter, keep it consistent, do it every time. If you meter like this, do that every time. If you meter, 45 degrees down to the ground, do that all the time so that you have consistent results.
So good. And then at the risk of going into meters for the rest of the Q&A, we're going to transition topics for you guys. Just so you know, Richard has the most incredible resource, just encyclopedia, honestly, on their blog. There are articles upon articles. You are so wonderful. Answering so many of these questions with visual examples, and they are so responsive. So if there's something we don't get to here and now, check out that blog, and it's real likely it might be there. So I do want to ask, earlier, Molly had a question about the Frontier. Is it true that you can only print up to an 8x10 comfortably on the Frontier? If so, she's really inclined that she'd love to have the option of printing up to 16x20 if they'd want. what is the way that you would go about that?
So, I mean, there are a lot of things to consider when you're talking about print size, and scanner is definitely one of them. So the way that like literally these digital elements are coming together in the scan, the structure of that scan is different from Frontier to Noritsu. So we've got examples on our blog that compare the two scanners that you can really zoom in and kind of see those structural differences. And I mean, it's kind of hard to explain verbally, but you'll see it. And then Noritsu just happens to have a structure that can be artificially rezzed up a little bit more so you can go bigger than you can with the Frontier. We've also done blogs about, scan size versus print size, and a lot of those rules are general based on pixel size and based on the golden rule of you want your image to be 2 size at 300 DPI for the best print results. But other things affect that too. So if you're printing on, say, a fine art paper that has a very watercolor-esque texture, you might be able to get away with something that is a little lower resolution, a little bit bigger because of the texture of that material. Or maybe like a canvas. Again, adding that texture underneath helps to make it look a little bit better. Other things like viewing distance, if somebody's looking at a picture right here and it's in front of their face, it needs to be really crisp and clean. But if I'm going to be looking on it while it's on a wall and the closest I could ever get to it is 8 feet away, then you probably can go bigger because the resolution doesn't have to be quite as good.
Great answer. Cool. And then we, on the subject of traveling, when traveling with underexposed film, how would you protect it if they won't hand check it?
With exposed
unexposed. Film? I said unexposed. Yeah.
Well, I mean, how would you recommend traveling with it?
Mm-hmm. Like if you're on the way to a destination wedding, they refuse to hand check it.
Well, if they refuse to hand check it, then you'll have to obviously scan it through.
Unfortunately, there's just not a lot you can do about that. It depends from country to country. Some folks will do it, some won't. It's always worth trying.
It's always worth trying for sure. I mean, I've seen like Sylvie Gill just posted something where she was like arguing and crying with the guy, and he finally let her through to be able to hand check it because she had like 80 something rolls of film from this beautiful wedding in Italy. And so, I mean, try for sure, but in this day and age, it might be a little, it's going to be risky in some places to do that. And so as long as it can go through the carry-on X-ray, that's better than checked luggage, because checked luggage gets like crazy X-ray it's almost guaranteed your film will be X-ray damaged if it goes through the checked luggage. Mm-hmm. I'll just say that.
And then another thing, people talk about lead-lined bags a lot, but nowadays the issue with using a lead-lined bag when you're trying to protect your film, even if it's carry-on, one of the issues with that is the guys that are looking at the X-ray, all they have to do is pump it up a little bit to try and see through that. And that can actually end up being worse for your film when they're pumping up the power on the X-ray. So don't use lead-lined bags either. It's not worth it. It probably presents more risk than it does actually protection.
Good to know. And then the last question, again, you guys, you've been so invested in this, and we thank you for participating. If there's anything, walking away from here, go to their blog. If you really, need a specific question about something, you can direct message us, but on If I Made or Richard Photo Lab. But we recommend first going into those resources that have available. So Amelia asked earlier that she's scanned 400H on the Fuji Frontier, and the color changes can be really heavy-handed and limited. What would you say you guys do to achieve the tones in a better way if you don't use post-processing to get to there?
Well, I've never scanned on the Frontier before, but are you saying, Amelia, have you actually scanned your film on the Frontier? Because that's awesome. Do you have your own Frontier?
If you're still here, Amelia,
if you're still here,
on the chat.
I think that it really depends on the negative. It's a specific situation because I don't know. Maybe there was something in that image that was creating very very dramatic shadows or a very dark situation. It's hard to tell for sure, but like we've always said, providing us with a negative that has highlight detail, shadow detail, everything we need to provide the most dream scan possible is needed and required. And so, but I can't speak for what she did on the Frontier and maybe what we would do differently, because it's so specific to the image.
Mm-hmm. And not just the image, but the person who's actually operating that scanner. Like anybody can get a scanning machine and scan their own films, certainly, but not everybody can do it well. This is really, it's an art. It's a craft that people have practiced for decades to really hone their eye and get great at what they do. Just like you guys spend years and years honing your craft as photographers, our scanning technicians spend years and years honing their crafts to be able to do that really, really well. So that can definitely contribute too.
Yeah. Are these bowling shirts?
Well, we do like bowling.
Yeah, we do. We should
have having a little bit of a technical. There we go. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining us in Richard Photo Lab. Thank you all. You guys are wonderful. Yeah, of course.
There's just I think Vegar, I don't know, but I'm sorry, I'm saying your name wrong. You have a great question, and actually it's something that we have actually asked Fuji. As you guys can see and as you guys can feel, like film is coming back. There's like a film renaissance, and it's amazing to see. It's kind of like, it's even more powerful, I think, than like the record resurgence that's happened with vinyl. But film is coming back, and we're trying to promote that as much as possible. And we've gone to Fuji, we've gone to camera companies telling them they need to start making film cameras again. We've gone to Fuji and telling them they need to start, upgrading their Frontier equipment. We've gone everywhere. And so we're in it, but you guys got to be in it too. So as long as we can get the film community around this idea of spreading this awareness to all the manufacturers that film is coming back, tell Kodak, tell Fuji, tell Hasselblad, tell Leica, tell everybody. That's the only way it's going to happen.
Be loud and proud, guys.
Yes, we're film shooters.
So good. Well, you guys, we are going to wrap it up. Thank you all for being so invested in this. Again, we love your participation. We love that the industry is getting more and more knowledgeable. You guys are amazing. We love watching you grow. And this investment matters so much in those results. So we do have an upcoming class with Madison Labs if you are a hybrid shooter and are interested in bringing your digitals as close as possible. Not something you can actually replicate, we know, with film, but tune in for that, and then keep looking out for Richard Photo Lab and all of their amazing resources. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Yes. Awesome. It was so much fun. If you have any other questions, let us know, hit us up, email us, email If I Made. We're happy to continue the conversation. We love this.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys.
Bye, guys.
You gotta hang out for a second.